What the Tech is sponsored by Shutterstock, with over 26 million high-quality photos, illustrations, vectors, and video clips. For 30% off your new account, go to Shutterstock.com and use offer code WhatTheTech8.
What the Tech?
Hey everybody, welcome to What the Tech. I'm Andrew Zarian, and of course I'm joined by the very, I don't have a word for you today, Paul.
Agitated.
The very agitated Paul Thurrott. How you doing, Paul?
I'm pretty good.
Is that a word that people use to describe you? If you were to say to anybody, describe me in one word, would it be agitated?
No, I don't think so. But people often misconstrue criticism as hate. I get a lot of that. Like, why are you so full of hate today, Paul? No, hate is such a strong word. I mean, I don't hate most things, and certainly not most people. But I don't know. I'm a little actually here. Let me give you an example. I'm a little depressed by the state of just popular culture criticism that occurs in the world. So, for example, I've got a bunch of friends. They go to see movies. They come back and they're like, "Oh my God, you got to go see this movie. This was incredible." And I go see the movie, and it's terrible. It's awful. And I don't understand why just people that I know and respect, especially, and then of course the wider world, is so accepting of things that aren't very good. And so the example I'll give you that has nothing to do with technology is, they've been remaking the Star Trek movies, right? Who is it that's doing it? Whoever that person is, famous director that people who are into movies would know, is making Star Trek movies. And so they came out with one 2 or 3 years ago, Star Trek. I think it was just called Star Trek or whatever.
J.J. Abrams.
J.J. Abrams. Okay. And the first Star Trek movie that guy made was actually, I thought, pretty fantastic. I thought that was a really good movie. And this summer, a second one came out, kind of long anticipated. It's got the guy who plays Sherlock in the UK version of the Sherlock TV show as the villain, which I think that guy is fantastic and an amazing actor. And the first movie was great, so clearly this one will be great. And we watched it last night. And to my son, to his credit, 30 minutes, or actually I would say halfway through it, got up and walked out of the room and he said, "I'm not watching the rest of this. This is terrible." And he's right. This was a terrible movie. And it's a weird thing because I wanted it to be good. I expected it to be good. The first one was very good. It's got actors that I respect and know in it. And, Peter Weller's in it. The guy from RoboCop plays the Admiral in this movie. It's terrible. It's a terrible movie.
I thought when you said your friends are, critical of pop culture and you're a little critical of pop culture, I thought it was going to be a Miley Cyrus reference from the VMAs.
No, that's a completely different plane of existence. And I'm also embarrassed by that. But I'm just something that I sort of care about. In other words, like, I wanted this movie to be good. I thought it would be good. That movie's terrible. And all of my friends think it's like oh my God, this guy can do, they go on and on and on about how great this stuff is. And it's like, you know what? You people just aren't critical enough. And I think that maybe I could be accused of being too critical. But, when I look at what I do for a living, of course, I have to cast a critical eye on whatever it is, tech products and services and so forth.
Are you a fan of Star Trek? Like, are you a big Star Trek fan?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, yes. Although I was one of those guys, like, for example, Star Trek The Next Generation, when that first came out, was awful. It eventually became pretty good. And when it became very good was with the Borg stuff that they did. Phenomenal. And back in the day, 10, 20 years ago, whatever it was, when they did that Borg movie with the Next Generation cast, I mean, my friend and I were joking that we would have to wear Depends to the theater because it was going to be so excellent. And that movie was, in fact, quite good for for that time period and for what it was. So I like all this. I like Star Wars, and I'm into all this stuff. But man, this movie stunk. It was terrible. And for anyone to claim otherwise, I'm not like anyone else.
I mean, there are a lot of movies like that. I think there are a lot of movies that are terrible, and people say, "Oh my God, it was so good."
That's the problem. See, I don't mind that it's terrible in a way. What I mind is that the hype builds up that this thing is going to be good. And so, we were talking about the Chromecast before we started, for example. This is a product that got an amazing amount of hype. It still does. People are still trying to jam it down my throat like it's something excellent. It's $35. So, whatever. It's awful. It's really awful. It's pointless. It shouldn't exist. You shouldn't buy it. and there are better things out in the marketplace that aren't that much more expensive that you will derive much more pleasure from. And it's like just by saying something as simple as that, it's clearly to a certain percentage of people out there, it's like I'm a crazy person. I just don't. It's like, I'm sorry. I spend a lot of time using and evaluating living room digital media solutions. I have every single device basically, or have had every single possible device. I've done everything you can do. Some stuff works really well. Some stuff works fine, whatever. And some stuff just doesn't make any sense. And this is an example of something that makes no sense at all.
See, I have it. I got it on day one. And I also did a small review. And I'm like, it's pretty cool. You could shoot your desktop there. I have yet to use it. I tried using it a couple times. And I realized, first of all, there are a number of issues. Like the fact that the screen turns black every couple seconds randomly.
Yeah.
It's
Wi-Fi is the problem.
Yeah.
The problems with this thing are legion. So, I have to say, my wife and I will watch TV at night, and we'll watch a show like The Killing is a good example of this, and Game of Thrones is a good example of this, where before the show starts, they'll say, all right, guys, get your second screen experience ready, because you got to have some kind of a tablet or something to watch the show, and there's other stuff going on, and, people are going to chat while they watch TV shows and stuff. And it's like, I just want to watch the damn show. Am I asking too much here? I just want to watch the show. I don't want the extra stuff. And I don't mind that it's available, but the Chromecast approaches this equation from the opposite end of the spectrum, which is that it starts with the assumption that you have the second screen, you want to use that second screen, and you're going to start from that second screen. And I accept and understand that people will sit in front of and I do this. I mean, I watch TV or a movie or sports, whatever, and I'll have maybe a laptop open or my phone or a tablet, and I'll do stuff. I'll triage email maybe. I'll look stuff up from time to time on Google or whatever. I do all that normal stuff like anyone else does. But because I review this stuff, I've looked at the second screen experiences that various companies offer. And, I get it. I mean, Game of Thrones is a great example of why someone might need this, because Game of Thrones is the densest, most convoluted, most, dare I say, poorly written, books in the history of mankind. The second screen thing maybe is necessary for something like this, which I think, unfortunately, shows you the problem with that.
But can't you have a second screen experience with any of these devices like Roku and Apple TV and I mean, you're still going to get a second screen experience if you're using a tablet and you're looking stuff up.
Okay, sure. It's just not a formalized thing. I think a lot of what's happening is Apple, Google, Microsoft, whoever are pushing. Amazon's doing it too, by the way. This notion of you adopt their platform and you get this additional stuff. You can rent a movie from Amazon, and certain movies from Amazon have this thing where you can tap the screen and see who that character is, learn more about him over on the side. It's not a two-screen experience, but it's kind of like a two-view experience where you're watching the movie and learning more on the same screen, which is, kind of the way they do it. Whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't, me not using it or me not wanting it is not the point. The point is, for some people, that makes sense, and I understand that, and it's okay. But the Chromecast, by approaching this from the completely opposite end of the spectrum, is like this single tasking thing. For example, Apple offers screen mirroring capabilities through its AirPlay or whatever that stuff is called, and that works really well. And so you could do something like walk into the living room watching a movie on your iPad and say, now I want to watch this movie on the Apple TV, and you stream it from the iPad to the Apple TV. That works really, really well.
But to me, Paul, the purpose of this device was to be a direct competitor to AirPlay.
It's not.
That's all. I mean, that's to me. That's what I saw. That
only does that thing I just described. Yeah. That's all it does, and it does it for a very limited range of apps. And I haven't spent a lot of time, and I try not to do this. If I'm going to review a product, I try not to read a lot of other reviews. I don't want to be influenced by what other people say. But I was away when this Chromecast came out, like just as I was going away to Europe. You may remember. So I did read a few of the reviews of this device, and I immediately became suspicious because all of them pushed this notion of its potential, that it would be able to do this, and it would be able to do this, and when this is going to be incredible when it does this. And that is really disingenuous as a reviewer to say to people. The thought is sort of like, hey, it's only $35. What's
and that's
what's
exactly
the problem?
what it
Just buy
is.
one. Who cares?
Yeah, no, it's the price. That's the only reason why people justify it. They say, well, it's not doing it now, but the purpose of this device, we don't know. It may be this greatest thing in the world.
I don't care
within
how
a year.
poor you are. If you have $35 to spend on something like this, you have $50 to spend on a Roku. And that Roku will come with its own remote control. Doesn't require you to own another device or have it with you while you're watching the thing you want to watch. You don't have to control it from some screen. Just use it on your TV like everything else you've ever done when you watch TVs and movies at home. It works the way that you want it to. And to me, that makes more sense. And I think it's ultimately going to make more sense to most people. I don't think this thing...
You know what bothered me more than the lack of functionality on this device? When Google unveiled it, they just showed the little HDMI stick. You get this thing, and there's the extender, there's a power cable. I mean, you got to power this thing up.
Yeah, it's not what they showed.
No, it's not what they showed.
It was a lie. It was a lie.
Yeah.
So, whatever. I mean, ultimately, seriously, here's the problem. The Chromecast is not a digital device. It's not a set-top box. It is nothing more than a wireless display dongle that probably runs an embedded version of Android, no matter what they call it. That it's just a slightly less dumb version of a dumb dongle. That's all it is. This is not a device. You can't use it by itself. You have to use it with something else.
So why would they put this out? This is their third attempt in the living room. Why not just integrate this, I don't know, maybe in Google TV?
Sure. Right. Well, they never sold any of those. And so it wouldn't surprise me to discover that Chromecast becomes an app that you can put on any Android device or on Google TV that you can then cast, I guess is what we're going to call it, what you're doing, which will typically be a video display, but could be music, it could be the web, it could be anything, from one device to another device. That this is like the first version of it. It's like the dedicated Chromecast device. Eventually you'll be able to get Chromecast in a device that has wired Ethernet. And I think actually that will be better for a lot of people because it's a much cleaner connection and will enable a nice stream of like HD content, for example, which I have found very difficult to do here, like you have, where it pauses and stops and goes black. And I've had all kinds of problems with it.
Yeah, and I'm right by the device. I mean, I have a router on the second floor, so it's not that, okay, can't reach the internet. My laptop is right there. It's just, to me, it's been unstable. And I know other people that are really happy with it, and they haven't had these issues, but my experience has been not so great, and right. I'm not using it. It's just sitting there. In my opinion, right now, Roku is probably the best media consumption device in that sense out there.
Yeah, I would say general purpose, Roku's number one. Obviously, if you're invested in the Apple ecosystem at all, you need to get an Apple TV. The Apple TV works so seamlessly with the stuff that you've purchased on their services and interacts with your own devices so seamlessly that it would be silly for someone like that not to get that device. But yeah, I think Roku, very clearly is the one to get, if you had to just pick one.
And I'll tell you something. I found out something about the Roku, and I was really surprised about it. We have a Roku app. GFQ has a Roku app. We stream live on Roku. It's not HD yet, but it will be soon. I have gotten a ton of emails from new viewers that discovered us because of the Roku, and they're not really this, like, it's not this clicky, we have almost 160 people in our chat room right now. It's not like people that know to find you, and they're finding you, and they're going in the chat. It's like everyday people finding the content, and I was amazed by that.
They browse through the channels. Yeah, so I looked this up today. Channels. There are 3 channels available on Google, on Chromecast. 4 if you count Chrome, which is, I think, experimental or beta right now. But let's say 4. There are 750 on Roku. Now, 700 of those are ridiculous. I probably, or whatever. But, the other 50 are all of those high-quality, high attention kind of things that we care about. Hulu Plus, Netflix, HBO Go, Rhapsody, Amazon Video and Music. I mean, on and on and on. All that stuff. Vivo and Crackle and Snapple and Pop and
GFQ.
Whatever those things are.
And us.
Yeah.
We would be under the crap category, but it's okay. Just fill it in there. But no, I'm amazed at it. And the numbers, we got updates all the time. Actually, one of our viewers, Nick Craig, made the app. And, we got numbers where I'm amazed. Like thousands of people downloaded it the first couple days. Hundreds of people are watching it every time we're live with the show. It's actually surprising to see that we have made that transition. Not us, not these tech geeks. I'm talking about everyday people are installing this,
but
and
by
they're
the
like,
way,
wow, what is that?
But you just said is literally the point. Normal people can plug a Roku in and get to work. I honestly think that normal people, by and large, are going to have problems with the Chromecast. And anyone who ran into the wireless networking issues that I had right off the bat trying to get that thing set up, I think normal people would have given up on it. And it took me days to figure it out. So it's a problem. It's a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, except to Google,
I mean, but it's a Google approach, right? It's let's just throw 15,000 different methods and see what lands. And if one of it sticks and it's successful, look, we have a success right there. I mean, it's a very Google thing to do by putting this device out. I couldn't see Microsoft or Apple or any other company putting something like this out.
Well, no, of course not. It's ridiculously limited. This would be a feature of a Microsoft product, and it is literally, it is literally a feature of what Microsoft is doing with Xbox entertainment services and Smart Glass. It's a feature of what Apple has been doing for years with AirPlay and Apple TV. This is just, it's silly. It's almost like, Google had come out with Google TV, and then what was that thing last year? The Nexus Q, I think it was called.
The Q, yeah.
That were so horribly stupid and complex, and there must have been some kind of a backlash within the company where people said, let's do something on the other end of the spectrum. Can we make something that is ridiculously simple? Because I wouldn't call it easy. It's simple, and I mean simple in every definition of that term. Simple-minded, and okay. Here's a good example of why simple isn't always better.
We'll see what happens. I mean, who knows? In a year, we may be both wrong, and this is the coolest device in the world.
No. Listen, by the way, in a year, if we're both wrong, we're not wrong. What that means is that in a year, they've improved this thing. Someone said that. Someone said it to me on Twitter today. Said, well, in a year, when this thing is much better, you'll look like a jerk. Well, in a year, if this thing is much better, I'll recommend it. I'm not. I don't walk away from something and just write it off. This thing in V1 is a piece of crap, but it may eventually, improve.
Well, look at Android. Android was awful, version 1.
Yeah.
That first Android build was, I mean, barely usable. And
right.
Talking about Android, I just want to go into that. That whole, remember when that thing came out, it was that whole iPhone killer mentality. Everything was an iPhone killer. How did they survive that? How did they survive?
The iPhone killer?
No. They survived it by saturating the market, but it was so bad, that initial version of Android.
Well, because they don't have to kill Apple. See, the problem is, obviously, Android is the Apple killer, but that's not the point. Not in the sense that people are really thinking. In other words, the real point of Apple killer or iPhone killer isn't here's that one device that's going to outsell the iPhone, although certainly that was a goal. It was here's the version of Android and here's the device that outmatches the iPhone. It's a more beautiful device. It has better capabilities. The software is more mature. That kind of thing takes time. And I think as maybe with the Mac and Windows for many years, not as many people think, but for many years, Android never had to beat Apple that way. They only had to sell more, and then sell demonstrably more, and then sell like a factor of 3 more, surpass the number of apps, have an ecosystem that's just as mature and capable, all that kind of stuff. And so that kind of stuff takes time. I mean, it wasn't going to happen in 2010 or whatever year it was that the original Droid came out. It took a while.
Yeah. All right, we have a lot to talk about, Paul. The whole Microsoft thing, right. And
look, we already spent 20 minutes on a topic I did not want to talk about.
I know, that's amazing. You're like, I don't want to really talk about this, and boom!
You know why? But I said that because I knew if I started talking about it, I wouldn't be able to shut up. Don't let me rant.
We just.
You know what else I don't like about Chromecast?
Go ahead, Paul. What else? That stupid dongle.
Yeah.
Why do you have to power this thing?
Yeah.
We could continue to talk about it if you want, but before
I don't think HDMI delivers power.
Before we continue, we need to thank our sponsor, and of course, that's if I could do this. There we go. Shutterstock.com. What is Shutterstock? Well, if you are looking to create a website, if you are a graphic artist, if you're looking for stock photos, illustrations, vectors, and video clips. This is a place for you. Right now, I'm on Shutterstock.com, and you could see, I just typed in podcasts, and you have all these stock images here, a ton of them. And every day, they're adding more and more images. So if they don't have what you want, guess what? Check back tomorrow, and there's a good chance they might have it. They have over 26 million high-quality images, photos, vectors, and they have a great deal for our audience. If you go to Shutterstock.com and use offer code WhatTheTech8, use offer code WhatTheTech8, you get 30% off on a new account. That's a significant deal. We're not talking chump change here. 30% is 30%. It's gigantic. I use Shutterstock. I know Josh from T4 Show, which is on the network. He also does web designing with his company, J Maverick Design, and he's always on Shutterstock looking for some stock image to use as a example, as imaging for a website. Shutterstock.com, use offer code WhatTheTech8 and get 30% off on a new account. I want to thank Shutterstock for supporting What the Tech and, of course, the GFQ Network. So, Paul.
Yes, sir.
This little issue happening at Microsoft. Ballmer's out. And I actually had a lot of questions for you, and last week I had a ton that some of it has kind of been answered now, but this is how I see it. Whoever takes over, whoever's the new CEO, will be the first post-PC era CEO of this company.
Yep.
And the initiative that Microsoft has had, I mean, when Ballmer came in and obviously Bill Gates, their approach has to be totally different because Microsoft is a totally different company from the time that Ballmer took over. So is it an uphill battle for them, or do you think because it's somebody new that might come in, it may be easier to say, oh, look, it's a breath of fresh air. Look at all these changes. Look at all these products. Because Ballmer, I read that article on your website about Ballmer and his, I guess, tenure at Microsoft. And it was interesting to see, people like to say, oh, Ballmer was awful. Look, they lost this much. They lost that much. But you made an interesting point about saying, like, it's a multi-billion-dollar company. He's not going to take these crazy risks and mess everything up. They're generating billions in revenue, and they have products and services that are working. Office, Windows licensing, obviously, and everything else in enterprise. Why would he shake things up? And it was an interesting, approach because every other website I'm reading, I'm like, $900 million in losses here and $1.8 billion in losses there. What do you make of it? I mean, his exit actually is a little weird that it was so abrupt like this, but was this something that was planned, or was this something like last minute?
So one thing that you should read about Ballmer is Mary Jo Foley's interview with him. He says some very revealing things there that surprised me. And one of the things that he said, and it's hard for people out in the world like us to understand the world that he lived in. Because he is a man that's worth, I want to say, $15 billion. He runs one of the world's one of the world's biggest companies. I almost said most popular, but let's say
successful.
World's biggest companies. Always has. He's been part of Microsoft for roughly 30 years. He was always going to be the next CEO, and then he was the CEO. And it's hard for us outside to understand what that's like. That this man, by the slip of a tongue, could send Microsoft stock nosediving. By saying the wrong thing, he could destroy millions, if not billions of dollars in shareholder value in a moment. And that the responsibilities of such a position are vast and incomprehensible to people like us. And what comes out in her interview with him is that he had this discussion with the board of directors, of whom the director of the board, I should say, the board of directors, the main director, whatever I can't think of his title, the chairman of the board, is Bill Gates, right, the co-founder of Microsoft, his buddy from college, best friends for basically his entire adult life, certainly. So we don't get it. We don't get that him leaving the company has been a discussion that's been going on for years. That Microsoft has had to have some sort of notion of what that post-Ballmer world might look like and who might they hire as a CEO. But on the flip side of that story, which that thing was news to me, is this notion that I'm very familiar with, in that over the past several years, Ballmer has been implicitly responsible in the exit of many high-profile Microsoft executives. guys like Paul Maritz, Brad Silverberg, obviously Steven Sinofsky, all kinds of people have come and gone. Bob Muglia. People who we might have assumed at one point had a chance of being the next Microsoft CEO. Jeff Rakes would be another one. And so when you go back over the past 13 years, a lot of the really good people have left, and it's left Microsoft in a kind of a strange position because there is no obvious heir apparent.
Yeah, there's no number two.
Yeah, the situation that Microsoft faced over the past decade is roughly identical to the situation that Apple faces today, where they have several franchises that are multi-billion-dollar businesses that you just have to protect. You're on defense now. You're not on offense. In that article you were talking about, one of the things I said is that, because Apple almost went bankrupt, was literally months away from insolvency, they acted with a certain alacrity that only comes when you stare death in the face. They brought back Steve Jobs. He restored them to financial stability. He made the Mac viable once again. But even he realized that that wasn't enough, that they, even with all of the good work that he had done, say, from 1997 through
2000.
the early 2000s, that they would always be a tiny company unless they did something different. And that caused them to look at other things that they could do. And, of course, the iPod was the first thing that came out of that. And so that set Apple down a path of what we might call devices and services, what Microsoft is doing now. To say that Microsoft is copying Apple is wrong-headed, but it is fair to say that 10 years earlier, Apple, out of necessity, pushed down a path of devices and services.
Yeah, I mean,
services being things like iTunes and then eventually the App Store.
I mean, if you think about it, creating the iPod, it was almost like this Hail Mary that they threw, saying, this has to work. Well, if the iPod didn't work,
no. So I would put it a little differently. If the iPod had just flamed out and failed,
there would be no iPhone.
There would be no iPhone. But I mean, the point is, Apple would have continued as this smaller company, and they would have continued making computers, and maybe they would have done other things later. But of course, because it exploded, it set them on this trajectory that allowed them to do so much more. Microsoft, though, already had their iPod, iPhone, iPad, iTunes, except they were called Windows Office Server. When you have those products that generate tens of billions of dollars in revenues every year, you don't take chances on something that might compete with those products. I mean, it causes you to go half-heartedly into these other markets. So when Apple blazes the path with iTunes, with the iPod, Microsoft at first says, well, we already have Windows Media Player. What can we do with that? And they come up with all that baloney. And then eventually they realize that's not going to work. And then they do Zune. And Zune starts off as a very wrong-hearted device. It was an outright copy of what Apple was doing with a handful of additional kind of value-added features that the iPod lacked at the time. Their response to the iPhone was similar. Well, we already have Windows Mobile. Let's prop that up. What can we do? Oh, that's not going to work. Okay, let's do Windows Phone. Their response to the iPad, and my response to the iPad, I would say, was the same, which was, we had a tablet. Why, this is going to fail for the same reasons ours failed, and then it didn't. And
I said the same thing, Paul. I said, yeah, why? I didn't get it, and then I used one. But
you understand that the sort of myopia that would cause someone like me to say the iPad doesn't make any sense because I have years of experience with tablets and I know how this market works in a similar level at a similar fashion at an institutional level for Microsoft, because they were the guys that made it and they already knew how this wasn't going to work. And when they look at what Apple was doing, which is such a Fisher-Price toy by comparison, no handwriting recognition, let alone deep technology that would enable handwriting as a first-class data citizen on the system, which the iPad will never have. I mean, it still doesn't have. I'm sure they laughed. I'm sure they said, we're all set. They don't have all the stuff we have. But, obviously Steve Jobs had a gift. That's one thing. But, they charted a new course in an old market, which is something Apple did again and again. MP3 players existed before the iPod. Music services existed before iTunes. Smartphones existed before the iPhone. App stores existed before the Apple App Store, and tablets existed before the iPad. But yet, those things are all huge markets for Apple that they essentially reinvented and rejuvenated.
And and to kind of let's take it away from the fact that they built pretty decent hardware. I mean, the iPad is a really good piece of hardware. So is the iPhone. But it's also the allure of Apple and what they made themselves. You know, the PR that went into making Apple into this cool device helped it tremendously. While Microsoft is still, to many, looked at as this old, computer company. A lot of people still see it. And Apple is that cool, hip, renegade of a company. It's perception.
Microsoft has moved pretty quickly over the past few years, given the situation I just described. They're a major player in cloud computing with Windows Azure on the enterprise side, and I think with the SkyDrive, Outlook.com stuff on the consumer side as well. They're a major player in devices, although I think the failures of the Surface stuff this past year are very well known. But there are new Surface devices coming. They make the Xbox, which is beloved by millions of people. They obviously make great computer hardware like keyboards and mice and all that kind of stuff, and webcams too. They've done this transition where they deliver and then update software that is traditional software like Windows and Office, but as an online service. They've done a really good job with that overall. But they haven't gotten the basics right. And the basics are mobile platform. The Metro thing, nobody likes it. Nobody, not literally nobody, but statistically, basically nobody.
But Metro on a tablet, people still don't like it.
The percentage of people that I hear from that actually are just enraptured of Metro is extremely small. The bigger problem that they face, though, is that, and again, I think this was in the article. If it wasn't, it's in some other article that I wrote recently. But think of the awful situation that Windows 8 was launched into, or that it came to life into, which is sort of a metaphor for Steve Ballmer's entire reign at Microsoft, which is this: they had to address this mobile device explosion. They had two choices. Well, they probably had more than two choices, but let's just say there were two choices. One is they could do what Apple did. They could make a new mobile product. They could base it on Windows, but they would call it something else because Apple didn't call iOS iOS X or whatever.
Yeah,
they
OS X Mobile or something.
They called it something else. Or they could do what they did, which was attach the new mobile environment Metro to Windows, the classic Windows desktop, and kind of create this hybrid environment. The pros and cons are both kind of interesting because if Microsoft had done the pure mobile platform, nobody would have bought it. Nobody would have bought those devices. Just like nobody bought any of the other mobile devices that they've been foisting on people for the past 15 years, including such things as tablet PC, ultra mobile PC, portable media center, Zune, Windows Mobile, Windows Phone. Every single one of these things has not resonated with some mass market of consumers. So why would you think that this new thing, why would the next thing resonate?
Okay, so let me ask you this. Why didn't the past work? Why didn't, I mean, obviously we kind of know why, but like to kind of sum it up, like why wouldn't it work for them again if they were to come up with a mobile?
Well, I guess you could keep
exclusive.
trying. It's like that insane person quote, like what's the definition of insanity? Like doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right?
Because in all fairness, I mean, they were doing the Pocket PC way before there was any concept of an iPad.
So within the confines of a smaller market for PDAs, Pocket PC did really well. In fact, Pocket PC, Windows CE, whatever you want to call that stuff, eventually beat Palm. They beat Palm. The problem is that market was like tiny. The market for the smartphones that have come since, first with things like BlackBerry and eventually with the iPhone and now Android, is humongous. And in those markets, I mean, they're probably selling more Windows phones than they ever sold Pocket PC devices. The problem is, as a percentage of the entire market, they're in low single-digit market share, whereas in the past, they were like 40% of the market or 60%, or whatever it was. But the problem for Microsoft, the problem for Windows 8, though, is by making it part of the desktop, by kind of jamming those things together, they cause this kind of weird backlash because I think most people who use Windows PCs can pick up an iPhone or an iPad or an Android device of any kind and just kind of get going, and they're fine with it.
Immediately.
But for some reason, when you jam that environment, that mobile environment, on top of Windows or next to Windows, they react really poorly to it. And when you have a market that's the size of Windows, 1.3 billion active users, and a lot of them are kind of pissed off that you did what you just did, this creates another weird situation that's almost as bad as the mobile platform failing all on its own, because Now, not only is your mobile platform failing, but you've literally got this user base that's saying, I don't have to upgrade, so I won't. And in the meantime, I'm going to use stuff like the iPad or an Android tablet. And maybe when that Windows PC needs to be updated, we'll see what happens. It gets updated or maybe it doesn't. And this is the reality. It's that damned if you do, damned if you don't thing. And I think that Ballmer's entire 13 years so far as CEO has basically been that, that there was no way he was going to make a decision that was going to harm one of the franchises. But by doing so, they missed the boat on some important market transitions.
I mean, in the interview with MJ, she asked, what's your biggest regret? And I was actually surprised by this. I'd never heard him talk about it openly, but he said Longhorn to Vista. That was one of his biggest regrets.
Well, they blew it.
And they totally blew it. And that's
by the way,
something
that's a seminal moment. For the amount of time that I've been covering Microsoft professionally, that was it. That was the moment. And I think I told you, I think we had this discussion one time, that moment in October 2003, almost exactly 10 years ago, when they launched Longhorn, when they told the lie about what this was going to be, because it was a lie, that was the highest of highs for technology enthusiasts who cared about what Microsoft was doing. They were going to remake the market. They were going to get it right. They were going to kick Apple in the pants. It was going to be incredible. And then they did nothing but fail and fail and fail. And they stretched out the lifetime of XP because they couldn't deliver a product, which, by the way, is still a problem for them right now and is going to be a huge problem for them next April when they cancel support for XP, and there are still hundreds of millions of people using that
Still
system.
using it, yeah, on an everyday basis.
It's a disaster. It's going to be like the PC apocalypse. And
but Paul,
it changed everything. It just ruined everything. It changed everything.
Let me ask you this. I mean, to me, it seems like they have really, like in the article, I mean, enterprise is where their money is. Cloud service is doing pretty well. Office is doing well. It's mostly the services that they're offering is doing pretty well, but it's the consumer. People are like, oh, well, Microsoft isn't cool. It's a consumer confidence that's kind of affected by this. It's the everyday person going and buying a Windows 8 machine that's kind of about Windows 8.
Well, everyone has heard, even though no one seems to actually know anything about this stuff. Everyone, and again, I'm speaking generally here. I don't mean literally everyone, but generally speaking, everyone knows that Windows 8 should be avoided, whether or not that's really true, right? This is like common knowledge. And this kind of stink is hard to get off of you. It's like getting sprayed by a skunk.
By the way, I installed 8.1 for the first time.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna tell you and I went into it as an everyday user. I didn't go into it as nitpicking, the corners and the second screen. I didn't do any of that. I went in as an everyday user, and that little start button on the bottom, knowing that I could right click on it and everything is there, made my experience a lot easier.
Yeah.
And it's not because I couldn't do it before. It's because it's familiar and I know these things should be in that corner.
Right.
And I think for a lot of people, they don't want to relearn shortcuts. They don't want to relearn, keyboard commands. They just want to press the button over there and have everything listed. And to me, it made a difference. It made it's going to sound crazy, but I thought, to me, my experience was better on 8.1 instantly than it was on 8.
Yeah, so Windows 8.1 is definitely a big improvement. I think the question is going to be whether that message gets out to the world, whether it's enough of an improvement, because there's a big body of people that are really upset about Windows 8 and don't like it. And can we convince some of the, like I have anything part to do with it, but is it possible to convince those people that this is enough of a difference? Will this coming generation of devices, which will include mini tablets, traditional full-size tablets, more hybrid devices, new generation of Surface, Nokia tablet, all kinds of other stuff, will they be compelling enough to get people to kind of finally, who, last cycle kind of said, yeah, let's see what happens with the Gen 2, Haswell chipset, Bay Trail chipset, Tegra 4 chipset on the ARM side, will this stuff be enough? Will this collectively be enough? I honestly, I really don't think it will. I mean, I really don't. And there are questions about the future, Microsoft's ability to continue on this yearly update cycle, especially with all the upheaval, the recent reorganization. Steve Ballmer's leaving. Nobody knows if. I mean, what if he gets replaced from some guy from the outside who says, we're not doing this anymore. We're doing something different.
Okay, so that's my next question. Where do they go? Do they bring someone from internal and promote him, or do they bring someone from outside? Because if you had looked at it, Sinofsky was kind of being groomed to be that guy, right?
Well, by the way, that was the assumption from the outside. It may have been the assumption from him, inside. But I've been told again and again from people who said that was never going to happen.
So obviously they have to have a number two.
Yeah, I think the suspicion was that when he broke with the company last fall, that he found out he was never going to be CEO. Maybe he found out about this coming reorg and that he was going to be shunted off to some backwater part of Microsoft because of the reorg. I don't know. But it's a little odd for a CEO of a company as big as Microsoft to say, hey, by the way, I'm leaving.
We don't know who's taking
We don't
over.
have another choice, so we'll start looking for that guy, and whenever we find him or her, I should say, then I'll leave. It creates a lot of questions. It creates a lot of uncertainty, and we'll see how that goes. But the more I think about this, the more it's kind of hard to react to this stuff right away. You may recall on Friday last week was in a bit of a tizzy because it was so new and unexpected, and it was kind of hard.
Was it really that unexpected? I mean, it was
completely unexpected.
There was no rumblings, nothing.
Nothing.
Okay.
It wasn't like it wasn't like there was some number two in place like there was when Ballmer was number two to Gates, where you didn't have to think about it. If he ever announced he was leaving, it wouldn't matter because we always knew who this guy would be who would come in, and it's not like that. And so now that more time has gone by and I've had more time to think about it and more time to see what other people have said, because I have my own kind of bias is a strong word, but my own place that I come from with this stuff, and I look at what other people are saying about this stuff. I look at former Microsoft employees and executives who are now blogging about this and what they think and all this, and I kind of assess the entire situation. The more I think about it, it seems to me that this is a golden opportunity for Microsoft to do the right thing. And to do the right thing, what they need to do is what Ford did. And you got to remember that one of the Ford guy, I think it's William Ford, who was running the company at the time, realized that he wasn't the man for the CEO spot, that he needed someone better. This is an amazingly brave thing to do, by the way. And he hired Alan Mulally from Boeing.
And he's turned it around.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
And this is a guy from outside of that industry, right? There are great stories about Alan Mulally, but I'll just tell one because I love this story, where he took over as CEO and he had his first little meeting where the guys from all the parts of the company came in and showed him what they were working on. And he looked at their lineup and he said, so I see a bunch of cars here, but I don't see the Taurus. Where's the Taurus? And they said, oh, we still make a Taurus, but now we call it the 500. And he says, okay, well, that makes my first decision easy. We're going to call that thing Taurus because you only make one car I've ever heard of, and now you're telling me you renamed it.
Yeah.
So they need that kind of clear-headed thinking from someone who can come from outside the company, I think, objectively look at not just their strategy and this whole reorganization, but also their entire product line, everything they do, and say, you know what? This thing doesn't make sense. Steve Jobs did this for Apple when he came back. One of the first things he did was chop, chop, chop. Got rid of a bunch of redundant products. They had all these crazy products.
Crazy, yeah.
I don't remember the Apple product names anymore, but they had like product lines with like numbers. It was like 9600, 9450, 9590, 94. They had all these stupid products, and he was like, "Look, we make a desktop Mac and we make a laptop Mac." He kind of eventually got it down to like 3 or 4 things, and then he also did things like cut products that a lot of people cared about, like the Newton. Very controversial at the time, but
who cared about the Newton.
People did care about the Newton,
Really?
but it doesn't matter. Yes,
Insane.
really, because there were huge calls to have that thing come back. But he was right because he was looking at the future and he said, PDAs are never going to be a major market like PCs. We need to go to the next thing.
Yeah.
And he was right.
Ford is fascinating because, but here was the thing. There's something in common between Ford and Apple in the story. It's that both these companies were hemorrhaging.
Yeah,
I mean, Ford and all the other automakers, the biggest mistake they made was stop making cars, and they became lending companies. They started doing financing. That's why the car manufacturers failed, because you're not selling any cars, and the cars that you are selling are junk in reality, And now all these people are defaulting on their payments. They can't pay the car. So what happens when you're a lending company? You crash just like everybody else did in the financial market.
Yep.
When Ford restructured, they restructured and they said, okay, we're going to get back to making cars. We're going to get back to making good cars. And Ford had a bad reputation for 30 years. 30 years, it was bad.
You mean fix or repair daily is a bad reputation?
Fix or repair daily, yeah. Even their most successful car, which was a Taurus, it had its problems. So Ford, as an example, and by the way, I'm a big fan of Ford now. I think they've totally turned it around. They're making really good-looking cars. The design is nice. But I'm just my personal opinion. I can't see a Steve Jobs-like person coming into Microsoft and saying, we're going to innovate.
Because unlike with Steve Jobs, and this is aside from all the personality stuff, Steve Jobs was obviously a big person. Steve Jobs was obviously a person who had previously, he founded Apple, co-founded Apple. He had a certain gravitas and reputation that you could not ignore. He commanded that room. Someone coming into Microsoft, it's a little trickier because Bill Gates is still chairman of the board.
Ballmer's still there.
Balmer's still there. He'll be gone, but it's a huge organization for one thing. 100,000 employees almost now. 40,000 of them in Redmond. So, how do you command the attention there? You need to have the backing of the board. You need to have the explicit understanding that Bill Gates isn't going to jump in and cut you off because you just killed his favorite project. You need to have that thing. So I think that has to happen. I think ideally Bill Gates and the entire board leaves. I think the entire thing needs to be swept clean.
Oh, you think everything? They need to start.
Yes, because the only way you're really going to make a break with the past, and the past is important in Microsoft because the past was so successful. Because you're always going to have those people saying, yeah, but hold on. That decision is going to hurt Windows. Here's the newsflash. Windows is going to be a smaller business. So we need to go on to the next big thing. Let's do that. Microsoft still is, it's weird. Microsoft, it just occurred to me. Microsoft, when they got in trouble for the antitrust stuff, was behaving like they were a smaller company, even though they were at the time dominant in that market. And that's what got them into trouble. Microsoft today, it's like an aging quarterback. Like he still thinks he's got the arm. Yeah. He still thinks he's got the coolness. He still thinks the cheerleaders are looking at him and are interested. Yeah. And the truth is this thing's getting a little long in the tooth. And Windows is like that. Windows has reached this point where Microsoft has convinced itself, because they keep saying it again and again, that Windows has proven itself to be the most adaptable software product ever made. It's made all these great transitions. It will make more. Maybe it won't. I'm not saying it won't. I'm not actually suggesting that anything is black and white here, and I certainly don't have the answers specifically about what Microsoft should do. But
Paul,
I do think cleaning house.
Are you saying Microsoft is the Brett Favre of technology?
Yeah. Well, no, I'm saying Windows is the Brett Favre.
Windows.
Yeah. So I think they need to clean house. I think they need to start. I think they really need a fresh, objective look from the outside. And even if they don't hire from the outside, even if they don't follow any of this advice, I would hope at the very least that they hire a team of people who include internal and external people who look at what they're doing as objectively as I just described in very deep detail, and that they make institutional changes. Because if they don't, they're going to have another decade of they're going to make a crazy amount of money, and they're going to be completely pointless by the time it's over.
It's that whole comparison to IBM, right?
It's literally going to be IBM,
and that's
it is inevitable.
You know what I would like them to do? Whoever comes in as CEO, first thing, you know what? We've given the OEMs a year, 2 years to figure out what they're doing. We're going to start making our own hardware. Yeah. This is the Windows 8 laptop. This is what it should be. I want them to get into hardware. We've seen it with the tablets, but I want them to make a PC.
I also, by the way, here's something they could have done. Microsoft throughout the years has always made kind of reference devices. We're going to get into tablet PCs. Here's a tablet. This is what we think it might look like. Now go forth and make your own things. When Microsoft was going to make Media Center, they went to PC makers and they said, listen, you can't sell a tower PC. You got to make something that looks like a stereo component.
Let's put it sideways.
Right. Put a tower sideways.
That's
So
all you have to
the media center PCs that came out were huge honking tower PCs.
Yeah.
HP and eventually others, Dell made them and other companies. And I think that the change they could make, and it would be kind of an interesting middle ground, is that they could do something like Surface and say, here's Surface. We're going to sell this. But you can sell it too. And when you sell it, you could put your own materials on it. You could put your own colors on it. You could redesign the exterior of it. But what you get is that reference platform, the motherboard, the components. You can buy them yourself. You can swap them out, whatever. You could add 2 USB ports or something. You could make changes to it. Maybe that would be a better middle ground. But see, I feel like I'm getting too specific here because honestly, the specifics in some ways don't matter.
No,
what
I don't think you're
matters
getting
is
too
that,
specific at all. I mean,
Well,
it's the reason. It's the same exact reason why I buy a MacBook Pro. I buy a MacBook Pro because I know it's going to work the way I want it to work. And I bring it up all the time. The trackpad. The trackpad makes the experience when you're doing the pinch and zoom and when you're doing the swipes.
Well,
I got a chance to use one of those higher end HP laptops this week with the multi gesturing and the touchscreen. My experience was phenomenal with Windows 8. It was great. And then I went and I used a $600 laptop that I bought my wife, and guess what? It's crap. It's not the same experience. And I think for Microsoft, they need to control the hardware. They have to.
I don't know. So actually, it's possible that Microsoft just trying to be Apple across the board in whatever ways is never going to work. That by controlling the hardware, by which I think we really mean by being like Apple in that regard, that maybe that's not, that's not why the PC was successful, right? The PC was successful specifically because no one controlled the hardware. That you could buy differentiated devices from a wide range of companies, and they could do crazy stuff with them if they wanted to. If you think about it, one of the big learnings about Windows Mobile, one of the things that they improved was they didn't let people make crazy different devices. The Windows phones are all kind of roughly the same thing. Now, over time, of course, different companies have learned how to differentiate, but the software it's exactly the same. There's no customization at all.
And
as a user,
and Windows
like
Mobile,
that.
Windows Mobile, they had to do that because it was. I think HTC probably had one of the best UIs for Windows Mobile, and they had to because it was so awful.
But it was the PC model, and it stopped working when the iPhone came out. But it's not like the Windows Phone has taken the world by storm either. And so, even though I happen to like Windows Phone quite a bit, you have to honestly and objectively question whether it actually makes sense in the market.
It's fascinating. The whole Ballmer leaving is fascinating because this isn't a company that's dying. It's not it may be a slow death, but they're still bringing in billions in revenue, and they're still the biggest company in the world. So there's not that, what, if this person comes in, this is what they have to do. There's no turnaround because they're doing well. So either you're going to have someone in there that's going to make these crazy dramatic changes to the company, or you're going to have another person in there that's going to follow the model that's been put in place, Ballmer and Bill Gates.
Yeah. So here's the problem. What is going to happen is that Windows will kind of establish itself at kind of a lower level than it used to be. It already has, but I mean, maybe this continues. Maybe it keeps going down. Maybe it just plateaus at some point. We don't know exactly. But at some point, you have to kind of look at this and say, okay, it's not working.
You're talking about Windows.
We got to start over again with some new mobile platform again. Windows Mobile 3.0, the quickening, whatever. I'd rather do it now. I'd rather do it now.
Okay, Paul, you're CEO right now. You get the position.
No, I can't.
What do you do with Windows? Tell me what to do with Windows.
I can't. I'm
blow it away and start over?
No. To be honest, Windows as a desktop operating system is fine. Microsoft needs to sell a version of it that doesn't have the Metro stuff in it.
Yeah.
And they need to call it, I would call it Windows NT, but they can call it whatever they want.
Enterprise, Windows Enterprise.
This is, right. It's going to be the business version, By the way, there's no reason why you couldn't see the Metro as an optional install. And on that version of Windows, it would be optional because no one in the enterprise wants that.
You go into admin settings.
PCs.
You go into admin settings, and then it says tablet, smart PC, uncheck that. I could uncheck solitaire, and I could uncheck Metro. Windows Classic.
Right. So
I mean, it's still
that'd be
possible.
one thing. Now that doesn't address the problem with the new Metro thing. The big problem with Metro is it's the problem I knew from the beginning, which was they looked at what Windows Phone was doing and they copied it, but they didn't work with Windows Phone. They basically walked in and said, "Give us all your stuff," and they did. And then they walked out, and then the Windows Phone guys said, "We're here if you ever need us." And they said, "Yeah, that's cute. Screw you guys." And then they made the same mistakes that Windows Phone did with their 1.0 release, because they never, talked to them about that stuff. They made their own stupid mistakes because they went off in their own direction. And now one of the big themes at Microsoft is we're going to bring all these things together. They should never have needed to be brought together. They should have been the same thing from the get-go. Windows Metro, this Metro thing, should have been the Windows Phone thing evolved. They had a beautiful set of APIs that they could have evolved. In fact, Mark Russinovich, one of the key kind of technical minds at Microsoft, a technical fellow at Microsoft who left the Windows division after this happened, proposed years ago a Silverlight-based platform that could sit on top of Win32 and run these graphical touch-based apps and so forth. And he was basically told to go screw himself. And so he eventually another group of Microsoft picked up on that idea, and the product that they made was called Windows Phone. And by that time, he had left and he went to Azure. And the Windows guys, meanwhile, just re-implemented everything. They reinvented everything from scratch. And of course, what you get when you reinvent from scratch is something that's a 1.0 product. It's incomplete, doesn't work right. It only offers very basic features. It has mind-numbingly stupid things that it's missing. I always use the example from when they did .NET, which was another 1.0 from scratch kind of thing, where the first version of .NET didn't have any native support for sound. So you had to use like the Win32 APIs if you wanted to add sound to a .NET application. So Metro in 1.0, as you see in Windows 8 and Windows RT, is that thing. It's 1.0. So it's real basic. It's like there are things that you can't add like a clock to a tile because that capability just doesn't exist in the platform because it's new. It's just a new platform. I think that I don't think this would fix all the problems, but if it was up to me, if I was kind of calling the shots, I think I would leave Windows as pure. I would make that Metro thing an option on Windows, and then I would sell this other thing on the side for devices that would not include the desktop, and it would be a pure tablet. It would be their iPad, whatever, and of course, the lower end version of that would be the one they have on the phone.
Who knows? I mean, listen, maybe in 8.2, that's what you're going to see, an option to turn off Metro.
Yeah, and that's nice. But what that tells me is it took them 3 years to get somewhere they could have been right away.
Right away, and
because they just made bad decisions.
Yeah. I mean,
so we'll see.
That's what I
we'll see.
I messaged Paul when I installed. I'm like, this is great. I like the start button. 8.1 is really cool. How do I turn Metro off? I want to blow it away. I don't ever want to see it again.
Yeah, and you can't completely. Yeah. But you can sort of.
I have a question actually for Metro and desktop. Have they shifted? Because the point of having desktop obviously on RT was that a lot of the key components and settings were not implemented in the new UI.
Right.
Are they duplicating it or are they just moving it over?
They're duplicating.
They're duplicating it. Okay.
Yeah, because by the way, I do think that's the right approach.
I mean, is that they're like, oh shit, if we need to, add a feature where you don't get it to Metro, we can do it.
I don't know what the percentage is, but let's say that in just talking about settings, right, system settings, in Windows 8 1.0 and in Windows RT, the percentage of system settings from control panel that were available on the Metro side was maybe 10, 15%, something like that. In Windows 8.1, it's probably closer to 65, 70%, maybe 60%, somewhere in there. But, okay, so that's a huge jump, obviously. But more important, it's a huge percentage of the settings that people need the most often, right? It's not just arbitrary 60 to 70%. It's the ones most people need. And I think it's fair to say that with the next release, if they do an 8.2 or whatever, that they could get close enough that they could start thinking about getting rid of the desktop on an RT device. And I think that's when things get really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, you brought it up a couple weeks ago, the fact that Office wasn't available on Metro, that played a huge part in it.
Right.
You have this keyboard, you had this keyboard and you couldn't do anything with it because in Metro because there was no Word. It's It's an interesting time for them.
Yeah, it's funny because, if you think about Windows RT when it first came out, a lot of people get very sensitive when I criticize Windows RT. But this, again, speaking objectively, Windows RT is a brand new platform. Doesn't have any apps. It has no ecosystem. It's got nothing. It has a type cover. There's not a lot going on there. One of the key intellectual properties that Microsoft has is Office. It's a hugely successful platform in its own right. By bringing Office to RT, it kind of gives that platform. It makes it Windows because people think Windows and Office are the same thing. So they see Office and they're like, oh, this is Windows. It's reliable. This is something I can buy. It will be safe. So that's good. But obviously, if the Metro version of Office had been available, that never would have happened. And RT could have been a very different product. I feel like this would never have happened, but it's too bad in a way that Microsoft should have waited until this year to release these products. That this much more complete version of Windows RT running on better hardware, much more complete version of Windows 8 also running on better hardware, I think would have been a better sell. And another year in development would have been good just for quality of the APIs and the capabilities. They could have responded to developer needs better than they did. I don't think anyone would have complained about Windows 7 being in the market for one more year.
Oh, I don't think so at all. You're absolutely right. I don't know. Maybe it was pressure from the OEMs.
And then, if this whole PC collapse might have happened anyway, and Microsoft could have said, we could have knee-jerked out a release, but we're going to do the right thing. We can suck it up for a couple of years. It's no big deal. We're going to get it right. I think people would have responded to that very positively. We find ourselves in kind of a quagmire now.
Yeah, and listen, regardless of what they do and whoever comes in, the biggest uphill battle they have is the public perception of what Microsoft is. And for them to survive the next, decade at the rate that they're going, they have to. It's weird, but they have to bring back this cool factor about Microsoft and the products that they're releasing. I went to a Starbucks the other day. Every laptop was a Mac.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, in Starbucks.
I'm in
so if
Starbucks.
You went to Dunkin' Donuts, it would have been some Chromebooks in there. There would have been some, there would have been netbooks in there.
But you know what I mean? It's this branding and this image, considering the fact that they have Xbox, which is a younger generation than most Windows users, and it's totally the opposite of their enterprise market, and they're very successful, and they're dominating in the gaming world and the consoles. It's a cool device. But when you think of Microsoft, most people don't think of that.
Sure.
I don't know. They need to hire a good PR firm.
Yeah.
Whoever the new CEO is, listen, go out with a black turtleneck and denim jeans and say magical.
Okay, I know you're joking. Obviously, they can't do that, right?
Oh, crap.
They're already perceived as copying Apple at every step of the way. I really think it's important for Microsoft to chart its own course.
And I think they've done great with Xbox.
Yeah, and happily, that's a market that Apple doesn't compete in. So you can't say that they ever did something to copy Apple. But the Surface, as good as it is, and the Surface is the Surface devices are beautiful and they're well made. They're going to get even better with the next generation, but they exist because of the iPad. There's just no way around that. Windows Phone is beautiful. Would never have happened if it wasn't for the iPhone. It's not because Windows Phone copies the iPhone in any way. It really doesn't. In fact, that's one product where it followed the iPhone, but then said, we need to do something that's different and better. And I appreciate the approach of that. Windows 8 is something that only happened because of the iPad. And it is different. Whether it's better, I think the jury is still out. But there's certainly a healthy debate we could have over the differences of Microsoft approach and the Apple approach. I don't know. So I don't have like this explicit answer, like this is what you do. I'm a critic, not a problem solver. But I really feel like they need to chart their own course. And I think they need an objective outsider to make that happen. I don't see that happening. I really don't.
I mean, I was looking, as you were saying that, about who could possibly be the replacement, and Julie Larson is a name that comes up, and Tony Bates is another name that comes up. But you think they have to go from the outside to break that Microsoft way of thinking? Interesting.
I think they do. Yes, I do. Yep.
Yeah. Interesting, Paul. Well, that wraps it up. We're almost done. If you actually,
let me say let me say one more thing.
Go ahead.
That needs to be mentioned. And people should read Mary Jo's interview with Steve Ballmer. It's a 2-part interview. It's well worth reading. One thing that Steve Ballmer does make a very strong case for is that Microsoft should not be split up and that it should not be a company that focuses only on enterprise software. He talks about the kind of "and" thing, and there's actually a post that just went up by Frank Shaw, who's the person in charge of their communications, who also says the same thing. In other words, they're not devices or services. They're not enterprise or consumer. They're not individuals or teams. They're devices and services, enterprise and consumers. Steve Ballmer, I think in the interview with Mary Jo, says there's no such thing as enterprise email. You make email. You might make a version for the enterprise, and then you can tailor a version for the consumers. But if you've made one, you've made the other. I mean, why would you ignore a huge part of the market? It doesn't make any sense. And their approach to that is, I have to say, again, I can't claim that it's correct, but it is compelling. He makes what I would call a compelling argument for doing both.
For not saying, okay, consumer and an enterprise.
And enterprises, yeah. And you should read that. It's worth reading.
But they kind of do have that, right? What is Xbox?
Well, they're doing it now. I know that. I'm just saying, some people are saying the answer is to split up Microsoft. And I've certainly made the case for that in the past myself as well. But what he's saying is, you don't do one or the other. You do both.
You do both.
And there's a case to be made.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Paul actually has a really good article on everything Ballmer. I read it right before we started to kind of make myself a little smarter when we're talking about this. All I do is go to Win Supersite and I just read what Paul says, and then I go around telling people like it's my own ideas, much like every other blogger out there. I mean, something that I do. You can go to our website, gfknetwork.com, if you miss any portion of the show. Of course, winsupersite.com. Paul also does a great podcast, Windows Weekly and the Twit Network, with Mary Jo Foley and Leah Laporte every Thursday at 2 p.m. East. You also did a special, a Ballmer special that Friday.
Yeah.
And you could catch that archived also. Anything coming up, Paul? Are you coming to New York for the Nokia event? What's going on?
To my knowledge, that event has never been officially announced, and no one has been invited to it.
Yeah.
So I hope so. I'm very interested in what they're doing, whether it's a phablet, the tablet that we know is coming, whatever. I mean, I hope that's coming, and I hope that's the date. And if it is, and I hope I'm invited, I'll definitely come if I can. But as of today, I've not heard. So we'll see.
Well, if you come up, we'll hang out. We'll be friends.
Okay.
Well, we'll go drinking. Also, guys,
Yes.
if you want to help out the GFK Network and help What the Tech out, we have an Amazon affiliate link on our website. I'm going to post it in the chat room also. If you're watching on our website, or if you're not, go to gfknetwork.com. There's a little Amazon button. Click on that. We get 5%, whatever it is, from your sale, and it helps us out when we upgrade the studio and when I have to go and buy stuff to review and things like that. So please help us out by clicking on that Amazon link. And follow Paul at The Rod on Twitter. I'm at Andrew Zarian on Twitter. And I'm not going to go and play with Windows 8.1 because I still want to use it, unlike many other people. We'll see you all next week on What the Tech. Good night.